Well, we've seen protests today at Wits University. Students say they want all those who deserve a place not to be excluded if they don't have the money for tuition or if they have debt. At the same time, Wits is saying it's doing all it can to place students but cannot accommodate everyone, or it will simply go bankrupt. The university has created what they call a hardship fund. They say it's been able to give a place to over 95% of deserving students. Adding to difficulties, student funding body NSFAS says it doesn't have enough money for new students. So whatever happened to free tertiary education for poor and working class students as promised by then President Jacob Zuma in 2017? I'm joined now by Professor Jonathan Jansen, Professor of Education at Stellenbosch University. Good evening, Professor. Thank you so much for your time. So in 2017, President Jacob Zuma said there should be free higher education for all students who qualify. So what happened to that?
Well, the truth is higher education, any education is never really free, and people forget that. Secondly, what the president did say is there would be free access for those students who fall, whose joint income of parents fall below a certain threshold. So for those above the threshold, obviously you would have to pay. But there are other complexities here. For example, none of those arrangements made by the former president dealt with the issue of historic debt. So students who had accumulated debt over many years, many universities are saying, we will, in fact, collapse unless you pay in part or in the whole the outstanding debt. So those are some of the complications here that make it very difficult to claim that education is free and just go back and everything is sorted out. Yeah.
Has COVID-19 worsened it at all?
It worsened, COVID worsened the situation on two fronts. On the one hand, many parents lost their jobs or had drastic reductions in their revenue, in their income streams as a result of COVID. So they can't pay. Okay. Secondly, the budget given to government for NSFAS was cut, as had happened, as you know, for all the government departments. And so with both the reduction of funds available through NSFAS, as well as the parental capacity to pay, created this perfect storm.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned the issue of historic debt, and I was reading up a little bit about it, that there's this awful situation where students have historic debt because they've studied for a number of years, and each year they've ratcheted up more debt. Their parents simply can't afford to pay. What they're getting through loans, bursaries, is just not enough. And now, many universities are saying we simply can't register you for this year. And some of those students even have NSFAS funding, but NSFAS has not released the information to the universities, and the students are stuck in the middle. It sounds to me like there is a serious disconnect between what's happening at NSFAS, what NSFAS can provide, and what universities are doing. And I'm just not sure how it got to this stage and where the problem is and how it can be streamlined. What are your thoughts on historic debt?
Well, you know, the historic debt is going to be with us for a long time. So I can see the problem from both sides, having been a vice-chancellor before. I can see universities saying, we will go under. We won't be able to meet our monthly salary bill, for example, unless we get some money in via, for example, outstanding debt. I can also see the student's point of view. If I don't have the money, I'm from Mount Frere in the rural Eastern Cape, you know, where must I get this money that you would demand from me? You know, you're not going to get water out of a stone. So you have a standoff here. What makes matters worse is that a whole lot of the inefficiencies within NSFAS has not yet been resolved. It's much better now, but it's not. So communication has not been ideal, you know, in advance. Distribution has not been ideal through institutions. And yes, some institutions are just hopeless, you know, at being able to release the money in good time, even when they have it. And so from a student's point of view, the student is confused, the student is distressed, you know. And then there's another thing, and we seldom don't talk about, you know, we often refuse to take on this thing. There's a whole lot of students who are stuck in the system, who have been there forever, who've been doing MBCHB, the medical degrees, for 12 years. I just heard about that today from a colleague, and I know from many students sitting. So those are also often the students also at the forefront of the protest, and universities say, but you can't study forever, because the longer you stay in the system, the more difficult it is for a new student to come in.
Is that suggesting that those students are not deserving? Because what we're talking about is deserving students. So students stuck in the system, are those students who actually are just not making the grade, or is there some other explanation?
It would really be good if we could separate out those two categories of students. The student who, despite putting in her best, despite passing every module, despite parents having scraped together something, still cannot get enough funding in order to register and in order to study for the year. I think those students must be prioritized. That's certainly something I did. I prioritized students who had a clean academic record, but just couldn't make it, versus the students who, and there's a lot of them in every university, who've just been in the system so long that they make it difficult to take in new students.
We have seen violent protests at Wits University. Admittedly, it was a fairly small group, but they did get violent. There were, a student leader was arrested. Of course, all of us are asking, could we see another fees must fall season? Do you think the temperature is as high as it was a few years ago when we saw those nationwide protests, or are we dealing with a very different situation today?
I think we have a very, very different situation. I would be very surprised if there was something on the scale of 2015-16 happening again via fees must fall and roads must fall, etc. I doubt that. And the reason for that is, and I'm a critic of government on almost everything, but the truth is there was a substantial amount of money that took care of most of the students in the system, who simply couldn't afford it. And 300,000 or whatever the threshold is actually quite a decent level, up to which you would fund students. So I don't think there is that level of agitation, because most students are taken care of. And the universities that are better off financially, are the ones that took care of all of their students anyway, even before the former president's announcements. I don't think we have those dynamics in the system. However, however small those numbers might be, there are students who are still left out, even though they are deserving. And here you need a very close working relationship between government, NSFAS, and the institutions to make sure that those students are taken care of as a priority.